going. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Mammal Society free webinar on our iconic red squirrels. Now, I'm sure some of you have seen on social media that this week is Red Squirrel Awareness Weeks. So as we're putting in the chat box here, please share with us, anything that you're doing this week to celebrate red squirrels. Have you seen any recently, any sightings? Put those in there as well. And if you're attending any other events to celebrate them, please do let us know. So a little bit about these webinars. Every month, Mammal Society hosts free webinars just like this one. And if you'd like to stay informed about these events and the work of the Mammal Society in general, please sign up to our newsletter and follow our social media channels for all the information and obviously a nice host of fun mammal pictures and videos. So some little introductions. My name is Billy. I'm a zoologist, tour guide, and natural history broadcaster. Now, my main mammal interest is actually more marine-based, hence the whale and dolphin hoodie that I'm wearing today. I don't have any clothes with red squirrels on, which I do need to sort that out. But my main mammal interest tends to focus around our UK pinnipeds and cetaceans. So my sort of research background is in grey seal haul-out ecology and conservation. I studied grey seals around the Cornish coast and the Isles of Scilly for my postgraduate research at the University of Exeter. Now, I'm also a tour guide. I've just returned from a boat trip around the Hebrides looking for bottlenose dolphins, common dolphins, and minke whales, as well as a host of other awesome marine life. But actually, in the past few years, I've also developed a bit of an obsession with our UK mustelids, in particular our badgers and pine martens. And it's badgers and pine martens that I've had the opportunity to talk about on TV and radio for a couple of different things. But today, I am delighted to be joined by wildlife photographer and filmmaker Dani Connor and the amazing Nicole Still, who is the programme manager for Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels project. Now, throughout this presentation, please feel free to share your thoughts and reflections in the chat box. Where have you seen a red squirrel? What did you have for breakfast? Do you have a dog? Anything like that, we'd love to hear about it. And we'd love to know where you're dialing in from. And if you have any feedback on the timings and the format of this webinar, would be really appreciated. And if you have any questions for our speakers, please post them in the Q&A box. This will be monitored throughout the webinar, but we will have a dedicated Q&A session at the end of the webinar. This webinar is also being recorded, so you can share this with friends. It's going to be on YouTube after today. So let's crack on a little bit. So our vision, so for those of you who don't know, the Mammal Society was established back in 1954, and it's dedicated to the monitoring, study, and conservation of mammals across the UK. And our mission is threefold. We work to ensure a bright future for mammals across the UK. Sorry, I've got so many things open. I'm just going to move that there because I can see what I'm reading. So we work to ensure a bright future for mammals across the UK by inspiring, informing, supporting, and enhancing conservation projects and policies that protect and restore native mammal populations and their habitats. We also empower conservationists, students, citizen scientists, and nature champions to play a key role in mammal conservation now and in the future through providing training, resources, and survey activations. And then we're also seeking to build public awareness of and support for mammal conservation through education, communications, and campaigns. Nice. So with a bit of background, it's now you know a little bit more about the Mammal Society and who's joining us today. I'd love to hand over to Dani's going to be kicking off our guest speakers. So without further ado, over to you, Dani.
Hi, everyone. I'm Dani. I'm a wildlife photographer and content creator, and I'm going to tell you all about red squirrels. If you're familiar with my work, you'll know that it consists mostly of red squirrels. I went to Sweden 3 years ago as basically a holiday, and I quickly started to notice the red squirrels, and they're very accessible. They're not really threatened by grey squirrels or squirrel pox. They do have threats there, but generally they're very accessible. And I was starting to notice around 10 individuals that would come to our bird feeders every day. And this squirrel is called Digit. And to this day, I still follow him. He's around 4 or 5 years old. Why is he called Digit? Well, you can see he's swearing. He has a broken finger, so he is easily recognizable with this finger. But in this photo, you can see he's transitioning from his winter coat to his spring coat or his summer coat. And so he looks very patchy, and that silver coat is starting to disappear. But after about 2 months in Sweden, and this was during lockdown, so I sort of got stuck there, I found some baby red squirrels. This is a 5-week-old baby red squirrel, and I unfortunately found their mum. She was hit by a car, so I knew somewhere in the forest that there were baby squirrels. And one day I saw one jumping in the grass, and the next day I came back. I was there for 8 hours, and finally I saw the baby squirrels. Fortunately, they had teeth, so they were able to eat. So I left food every day, and my whole summer turned into following these baby squirrels. And there were 4. So each had different characteristics. And with time, I was able to identify each. And one thing that's quite amazing about red squirrels is that they do have differences. So females are slightly larger. Individuals have different colors. So some can be quite dark, some can be blonde. In the UK, you actually have some red squirrels that have blonde tails, but I was able to follow the individuals. And this one I named Baby Pear because he had a particular fondness for eating pear. Every time I would leave nuts and seeds and various foods, he'd always go for pear first. So I had to get a shot of him with sniffing some pear. And one thing I discovered quite quickly is that they make an adorable sound when they're eating. And they make this sound particularly when the baby squirrels were together. And it's almost like a, don't bother me, I'm eating. So very cute. I think he may have been more bothered by the microphone being a bit too close, but fortunately microphones don't eat seeds, so I wasn't going to take it from him. So I posted this video on Twitter, and by the end of the day it had 1 million views, and by the end of the week it had 15 million views. And suddenly I had an audience on social media, and this video basically changed my life. And I now am a professional wildlife photographer because of red squirrels. And this is another video. This squirrel is about 2 weeks or 3 weeks older than the previous video. And the sound quickly changed. And you can So following these squirrels closely, I realized how unique they are. They have so many different vocalizations, and even adults will have high-pitched squeaks, especially when they're doing their chase around a tree. The submissive one, or the one being chased, will make some squeaks. And this is a pair. On the left is baby pear, and on the right is chiborashka. You can hear some slight squeaks, but you can tell that they are quite different. So even at a young age, I was able to identify individuals. And the one on the right is far bigger, has a grayer face. And here they are together. And after about a month following the 4, 2 disappeared. Only around 20% of squirrels survive their first year. So there's various things that could have happened. A predator, like a fox or a goshawk in northern Sweden, but also it could have been a domestic cat. Many things. Also, because they didn't have their mother's milk, maybe what I was providing them wasn't enough nutrition, because obviously they would drink milk until they're 12 weeks old, and at that age their mum would kick them out. So a little bit about red squirrels. They are tree squirrels, so they're arboreal, so they spend most of their time in trees. And this is a female squirrel jumping over my camera trap, and they have these amazing tails that they use to basically help them jump through trees. I have seen a squirrel with half a tail, and it didn't disrupt her that much. She was still able to move quite easily through the trees. This is a male squirrel I've been following this year. I call him Buddy. And they use their tail to basically stabilize themselves. And I've seen them jump from 40-meter trees down to the snow. And it's just amazing how they move their bodies so they don't just splat onto the floor. They are really incredible. And so I'm going to take you on a bit of a journey of squirrels through the year. So in the winter months, particularly between December, January, it can change between different latitudes, but early in the winter is when they have their mating season, and they will do these squirrel chases around trees. So and they will chatter as they do it. So that one following could be a male following a female. There's been some studies about whether you can tell the difference between male and females by their color. I personally think that females are a bit more red. So there was one quick clip. So you can tell the tail's a bit more red and the males are a bit more like a gray blue. There's no actual scientific studies that prove this, but from just my observations, I think females are a little bit more orange or red. And then in the spring, there's lots of wildflowers. They start to lose their winter coat. And spring is actually quite an important time that I found, because their winter cached food has now disappeared. And now it's a time where they really need to start foraging and eating. In April, you'll have the first, around April, the first baby squirrels will start to appear, and they will open their eyes around 4 weeks old and start coming out of the dray around 5 weeks old. And the dray is like a squirrel nest. And females, if they've had a good winter, they've eaten a lot, they can have 2 litters, and baby squirrels are called kits. So this is baby pear coming down the tree. So they quickly become very active, and even at 6-7 weeks old, they'll start following mum, but they'll start having their own adventures, and they will follow their siblings a lot. And this is, it doesn't look like a baby squirrel, but it is. This is a 4.5-month-old baby squirrel. And very quickly, they will have instinctive behavior like collecting nesting material. So this squirrel is collecting lichen, which it will line the dray with. And one thing I've discovered is when they go foraging, every time they go back to the dray, they will collect a little bit more to put back in. So they'll constantly be doing some improvements to their dray, making it warmer. And something I find quite fascinating about red squirrels is in the summer, they will use 2 to 3 drays. And the reason for this is that this prevents a buildup of parasites. So they will have not so much ticks. Maybe in the UK they have ticks, but particularly fleas. So to prevent a buildup of fleas in their dray, they will move between 2 or 3. And they are very acrobatic. so they can hang from their back legs quite easily. And this is a squirrel peeping out of his dray. So as you can see, lots of different materials there, sticks, lichen, they'll use moss, leaves, even feathers if they can find it. And then in the autumn, it's very important for them to start collecting food and start caching. So this is a red squirrel filmed last weekend on Brownsea Island, and you can see it's a boy. And this is how they cache. So they will firstly put the nut. He was putting chestnuts into the ground. So he'll first try and get it really deep and then pat it with some leaves. And hopefully another squirrel won't find it. But the purpose of this is that they can hopefully find their cached food during the winter months, and this helps them survive. But they will build their body weight over the autumn months, and they will gain about 10 to 20% of their body weight to survive winter. Obviously, winter in northern Sweden is a bit harsher than in the UK. Something I have found fascinating is how many mushrooms they eat. And in the autumn, they will collect mushrooms and actually cache them into branches, and they will dry out and they will refine them in the winter. Something I also discovered is that they eat amanita, which, if you know anything about mushrooms, they're quite deadly to humans, but red squirrels and some other species can actually eat them, and they have the proteins to digest them. So they'll take a few bites and they won't have any effects. If a human would take a few bites, they would have a psychedelic trip probably, but squirrels don't have that. This is another young squirrel, about 4.5 months old, trying to work out how to balance whilst eating a spruce cone. And it does take practice. If you think about it, trying to hold a spruce cone whilst trying to open it, take the shells out and get the seeds can be difficult for a young squirrel. In the winter in northern Sweden, when they don't have access to water, they will eat a lot of snow. So they will pick up pieces of snow and just take big bites. And in the winter months in northern Sweden, they eat lots of different cones, and it's fascinating watching them collect them and actually open them up. And they will always go from the base up, and they will rotate it like it's a corn on the cob. And they do it with such speed, and yeah, it's amazing to watch them. So they'll quickly take a piece off and eat the seed. They have an amazing sense of smell. They can smell which ones are ripe, so they'll always go for the ones that are most ripe. In northern Sweden, the red squirrels have a silver winter coat. In the UK, they don't have this, presumably because there's not that much snow, but they will have a continuous red coat. And curiously, some red squirrels were translocated from Scandinavia to the UK, and you will find some red squirrels in the UK with slightly silver coats. Billy, the photo behind you, that's a British red squirrel, and it has quite a silver coat. And also this red squirrel on screen, she's a female, and you can see she's quite orange. And this is another female. So I think that the females have more of a red appearance, and the males are more silver gray. If red squirrels aren't happy with you, they will do something quite amusing, which is wag their tail. So if they're unhappy, they will do this. They will do this if there's a predator, and they also make lots of vocalizations if they're annoyed. So they'll chatter and they'll stomp their feet on trees, and that just says, that's a warning. It's like, I know you're there, don't come closer. This is a red squirrel from Cumbria, and she's currently lactating, so you can see her teat. But you can see that typical very red coat, but this one is quite unique because she has a blonde tail. This is another red squirrel from England, and this was a boy, and he's got a slightly blue-grey coat. The same red squirrel. This one was from Scotland, and even in the UK, the red squirrels will have they don't have the winter coat. Sorry, they don't have the silver winter coat, but they will have a very thick coat and these very lovely long ear tufts. They look like elves. There's one licking. And this was a red squirrel that I filmed in Wales. So the past year or so, I have been traveling across the UK and telling different stories from, different stories from the UK. It's fascinating, the different threats that the squirrels in the UK have. So last weekend, I was actually filming a video about small islands. So I went to the Isle of Wight and Brownsea Island, and it's quite unique there because you've never had grey squirrels there because they are isolated islands. So there's different issues there, potentially a genetic bottleneck. That's something I look into. But in England, Wales, and Scotland, you do have grey squirrels. And on Anglesey, which is where this squirrel was photographed, you occasionally have grey squirrels crossing the sea. Either they go on the bridge or they swim, and they are managed. But there was an amazing conservationist called Esme Kirkby who actually helped eradicate grey squirrels on Anglesey so that it could be full of red squirrels. Sometimes they bite their tongues and it can hurt. Well, I'm not sure if that's what's happened here, but this was a red squirrel I caught in the moment with a cob nut in its mouth. And that's me. So I absolutely adore red squirrels. They're very charismatic, very funny. Now that I've been following them for several years, I've realized how unique they are. It's quite easy to identify between different individuals when you really get to know them, and they are fascinating. And I will continue sharing the story of Swedish red squirrels as well as the red squirrels in the UK. Our red squirrels in the UK are far more threatened than those in Sweden, and I would love that the UK could be in a position where it would be covered in red squirrels, because it is a shame that they are threatened, and they are really beautiful and amazing animals. So it would be lovely to have them across the UK.
Thank you so much, Dani. I've got a couple of questions, but I'm going to save them for later on when we do the Q&A. But that was awesome, and I'm sure everyone enjoyed seeing all the amazing pictures and videos there. So we're going to hand straight over to Nicole, and I'll let you share your screen, and we can crack on with part 2.
Great. I should have planned better and not let Dani go first, because I'm afraid you will get a slightly less wonderful photos from my end. I spend a bit more time looking at maps. But Dani gave a really nice transition there into the status of squirrels in the UK. I manage the Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels project, which is a national partnership project focused, as the name suggests, on saving the red squirrels here in Scotland. So as Dani mentioned, and most of you will know, red squirrels are one of the UK's most iconic mammals, but they're also one of the UK's kind of key native mammals. So they're the only native squirrel species found in the UK. And because of this, they serve a really unique ecological niche. So Dani mentioned a bit, and you certainly saw it in her photos. They're conifer and cone specialists. So they've spent their evolutionary history evolving alongside our native coniferous and conifers, as well as some of our native broadleaf forests. Because of this, a lot of those feeding behaviors that Dani was able to show you visually there are really important to our forest health and regeneration. So as you saw, red squirrels will bury tree seeds, and this helps to generate young forests and new saplings. As she also pointed out, I was really happy to see the mushroom photos. So squirrels are omnivorous fungivores. So in addition to nuts, seeds, buds, flowers, they'll even eat things like frog spawn, but they also eat a lot of fungi. And that's really important for helping to spread the mycorrhizal spores, which are also really important for our native forest health. In addition to the ecological role they play, they also play a really important cultural and socioeconomic role. So up here in Scotland, they're one of the big 5 native mammals, and this makes them a key tourism draw, not just for folks locally around Scotland, but across the UK, and in some cases from other parts of the world. As Dani suggested, though, unfortunately, they are under threat. And in Great Britain, while they thrive in other parts of Europe, they are classed as endangered within the UK. And that's largely down to the incursion of grey squirrels. So there are other threats to red squirrels that are common across Europe. So these will be things like forest management and loss of habitat. But here in the UK, the biggest threat is down to the introduction of invasive non-native grey squirrels. These were introduced largely during the Victorian era to many parts of England. And since that time, we've seen greys take over most of the mainland UK. So you'll see going back from 1945 to 2000 to 2010, greys increasingly moving further and further north across the UK and replacing those red squirrels where they previously had an extent across most of the UK. The reason that grey squirrels pose such a threat to our red squirrels, in addition to just being larger and having a higher productive rate, so they'll have often an additional reproductive season or an additional breeding season each year. They live at much higher densities than our native red squirrels, and they can build up fat reserves much more easily. Additionally, they interact with our native forests in a different way, so they'll digest acorns more effectively. They'll also eat acorns earlier in the year because they can handle a higher tannin content in those green acorns. This means that they can take away a lot of those resources that our native reds rely on before they have a chance to cache them for the winter. The biggest threat that they pose is the introduction of the squirrel pox virus. I haven't included any of the photos for those of you that are interested. There are lots of resources where you can learn more about the squirrel pox virus and the threat that it poses to our native reds. But the key piece is that it's carried in its native reservoir, which is the grey squirrel, and it's fatal to a red population. So when introduced to a local population, it can often devastate an entire local red population within just a matter of weeks. That sounds a bit doom and gloom, but it's not all. So because of that spread of grey squirrels, 75% of the UK's remaining red squirrels are found here in Scotland. And because we have the bulk of the remaining red squirrel population, for a long time, red squirrels have been treated as a conservation issue in Scotland. Increasingly, we're paying more attention to the role of invasive non-natives in that story, as well as the impacts on forestry. But because of this long-standing attention to red squirrel conservation, we've seen less of a decline of red squirrels in Scotland than we have in the rest of the UK. So you saw those earlier images of grey squirrel incursion across the UK. I'll show you a more up-to-date map in just a moment here. But here in Scotland, we've only seen a 7% decline in the last 2 decades or so, compared to nearly 40% decline across the whole of the UK. And as I said, a lot of that is down to the attention and concerted collaborative effort that Scotland has taken to managing red squirrels and invasive grey squirrels. So within Scotland, we have a long-standing strategy for red squirrel conservation that's put together by the Scottish Squirrel Group and dates back to the original one in 1998. So it's been something that the country has been approaching for a long time. Since 2015, which is the most recent version of the strategy, the bulk of the work detailed in it has been delivered by the Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels project. So across Scotland, the aims of that national strategy are very much to maintain those existing red populations, most of which are found in the Highlands and the Grampian areas, so the northeast. But we also have thriving red squirrel populations in the south of Scotland, as well in areas of Fife and just on the border of our central lowlands. The strategy also aims to develop long-term approaches to this. So I mentioned it's been going on since 1998, and that work is constantly evolving and learning to improve, but also looking at ways to find and make itself more sustainable into the long term. So there's a number of different conservation actions that are outlined in that strategy, and agencies and stakeholders across Scotland will participate in. The most important is maintaining public support and improving public awareness of the issues around red and grey squirrels. In Scotland, we're very fortunate that having red squirrels in most of our cities is still in living memory, and so it's something that people can remember and want to return to. But we also take a leading role on habitat management and managing new forests, existing forests, and our stronghold forests for red squirrels. We also take a really active approach to population monitoring through sightings across the country, as well as monitoring. And that's really helpful for monitoring things like disease outbreaks and the spread of squirrel pox, which at the moment is only found in the south of Scotland. We also work to advance our approaches to red squirrel conservation. So we do a lot of work and work very closely with our partners that are working on pine marten reintroductions and translocation projects across Scotland, as well as different research areas around squirrel pox vaccines, fertility control that the UK Squirrel Accord is leading on, and lots of other exciting advancements to help the national approach to red squirrel conservation. Our partners at Trees for Life up in the Highlands also work on translocations and reintroductions to help bolster red squirrel populations throughout the Highlands and some of our islands. To Dani's point about genetic bottlenecks and diversity, we look to make sure that we're spreading that genetic connectivity across Scotland and helping to bolster small isolated populations where they might exist. Most important to the strategy, though, is the targeted grey squirrel control. So as I mentioned, grey squirrels are the biggest threat to our native red squirrel population, and this is really the work that Saving Scotland's Red Squirrels delivers on. So the project works nationally. We target 3 specific areas. You'll see those in the hash marked map to the left. I also promised a map of the updated ranges of red and grey squirrels in Scotland. So anywhere where you see red and purple on that map to the left will be areas where you can find red squirrels in Scotland. So we're quite fortunate that it is still the majority of the country, but particularly in those purple areas where we have red and grey squirrels interacting, we're keen to make sure that we protect the bordering red populations and ensure that no further incursion happens. So we work in kind of 3 key areas. Up in the northeast, we have an island population of grey squirrels. So this is an isolated population from the rest of the UK. We very recently crossed the milestone of having removed 10,000 grey squirrels from Aberdeen City. Those all originated from an initially introduced 10 to 15 squirrels back in 1971. I'll let that sink in for just a moment. So we're very close. We're not quite there yet, but we're getting very close to being able to say that we've eradicated that island population. In the central lowlands, so that's this line stretching across the country, right along the Highland boundary fault line, we work to stop that incursion and further spread of grey squirrels into our northern core red squirrel population. And we also monitor for the spread of squirrel pox. As I mentioned earlier, this only is found in the south of Scotland, and we want to ensure that if it is introduced, as it is likely to, slowly over time through our central lowlands and into that northern red population, we want to make sure that we're ready and have the appropriate management in place to be able to handle and protect those populations. In the south of Scotland, we work really closely with a network of volunteers to reduce the densities of grey squirrels, to make sure that those existing populations can continue to thrive and play a part in the national kind of genetic gene pool for red squirrels and have that population. So down the road in the long term, if we do get to a place where we can return reds across the UK, we have that connectivity in the south of Scotland already. Across the country, the project also supports a community hub, which is a centralized data repository for all of the squirrel data that comes in from Scotland, everything from sightings to control data to monitoring information, and has a whole bunch of resources for folks that want to volunteer and public guidance for squirrel conservation and management at an individual level. And then we also coordinate the national strategy that I mentioned earlier, and different landscape partnership efforts across the country. And that work has really paid off. So I promised that we'd end on a high note here. It wasn't all doom and gloom. So as I mentioned, we're getting very close to eradicating the Aberdeen grey squirrel population. On the back of that, we've seen a return of red squirrels all the way through the center of Aberdeen, which is very exciting. All the way along the Dee and the Don. Across the Highland line, we've been able to maintain that line and ensure that we haven't had further reductions in our red squirrel population over the last 2 decades, which holding a line for 2 decades doesn't sound very exciting or promising, but as you'll have noticed from those previous maps of grey squirrel incursion across the UK, that's a huge achievement in terms of maintaining our red populations. Across the south of Scotland, we've been really fortunate to be able to mobilize local communities to take a really active role in their conservation of red squirrels, and taking an active role in grey squirrel control across the landscape, but also really connecting with various aspects of red squirrel conservation and contributing to a community action approach. So for those of you, I'll admit this is going to be based largely for those of you based north of the border, but there's lots of ways to get involved with red squirrel conservation work here in Scotland, but elsewhere in the UK. So this week, as you'll have heard, is Red Squirrel Awareness Week. If you're north of the border or visiting Scotland, we also host our Great Scottish Squirrel Survey this week, which is a really important annual snapshot of red squirrel distributions and grey squirrel distributions across the country. Anytime you're up in Scotland, you can also submit your grey or red squirrel sightings to our website. You can also volunteer with the project or your local group. That'll be true for lots of places down in England as well. We do a lot of research and monitoring on red squirrels, and so you can contribute in that way. But of course, you can just celebrate and help support your local red squirrel populations in your back garden.
So thanks both. And yeah, thank you for everyone that's been sending in some questions. So we've got about 8 or 9 in here that we can start going through if you're ready for a bit of a Q&A team. We all set? Ready to go? Happy days. So we'll kick off with the first one from John Keary. And apologies if I pronounce anyone's names wrong as I read these questions out. So John's asking, are there any age or gender differences in the timings of ear tuft growth and molting? I'll throw it to the panel.
So in the first year, the kits will immediately start growing their winter coat, so they won't actually molt. But then in terms of when they molt their winter coat and they start growing their when they go from their transition from their summer coat to the winter coat, it can vary between individuals, but it usually happens roughly at the same time in my experience. Sometimes I notice that even in late summer, you'll have some individuals with patches of their winter coat. And I think it's just how quickly they sort of scratch it off. And sometimes in the spring, you'll see them scratching and you'll just see lots of winter coat or grey silver coat just blowing in the wind. So that's my experience. I'm not sure whether you can add to that.
Yeah, I don't know of any specific research into it, but there will be, yeah, I think the suggestion would be that older squirrels will respond and have that coat shift a bit quicker with time. But I don't know, I'll admit my own ignorance, I don't know that there's been any research that I can add there to Dani's answer.
Yeah. I know there's no gender difference. I would find that very odd that there might be a gender difference. It might be that females grow their winter coat quicker, potentially.
They might. There'll be quite a bit of regional differentiation too, which will probably play a bigger role, particularly on the ear tufts. Yeah, females, I think, again, regionally based, particularly those further north, will likely grow their winter coat a bit more quickly and probably a bit thicker, but without the research, I'm afraid we're relying on our own experience there.
Nice one. Great answers there. So we've got another one from Roy Marsden. He's asked, is there any evidence any reds have resistance to the squirrel pox virus?
Unfortunately not. The reason that we don't think that this is likely to occur is the rate at which squirrel pox affects red squirrels. So red squirrel from the time of transmission has about 2 weeks before they start to show symptoms, but then it's often within a week or 2 weeks that they'll pass away. So there's a peak time where they're spreading it within their other red squirrels. So there's gray to red transmission, but once it's in a single red, it transfers through the population much more quickly. And because of the fatality rate and the timeline, there's not really a chance for genetic immunity to establish. And as far as I know, there's no evidence that there has been any genetic resilience found in any populations to date.
Great answer. So, and then we've got another one, sort of a bit of a statement and a bit of a question to come with it. So Roland has said, congratulations on the recent HLF award to RSRN and SUP. In order to measure success of the project, can the annual spring survey be restarted from year one?
I can try to answer this. I will say I will clarify that at the moment, while we work very closely with are working very closely with Southern Upland Partnership as they take on the work in South Scotland, I cannot speak for that HLF award or what they have planned. They are in a development phase, so they are yet to put in their application for the delivery phase. And I will leave it with them to follow up on what's included and what work, and if that will include the survey. I can say for the National Spring Survey, which I think is being referred to, that we used to do annually in Scotland. Unfortunately, that was postponed due to COVID, and we haven't been able to restart. So that's the way that it was previously conducted is demanded a lot of staff time and resource. And so as part of the current phase that the project's in, we're also working with NatureScot and a few of our other partners to figure out ways for more effective annual surveying. So the hope is that the spring survey is hopefully going to come back in some format, but it might look a bit different than what had been done previously, but hopefully to the benefit of everyone using that data.
Nice one. Great stuff. And then I'm just going to throw another one at you. We've got a few more to get through still. Jane Drury has said that she's fascinated by the link between pine martens. Or as I'm reading, someone said another question, so I'm going to scroll back up. So Jane is fascinated by the link between pine martens and red squirrel conservation. Can we just expand upon this a little bit?
I feel bad that I'm talking a lot. Janie, do you want to? I can jump in, but I'll let you.
I can introduce that and you can finish it. So quite interestingly, red squirrels are lighter than grey squirrels. So red squirrels are around 300 grams. Grey squirrels can be around 500 grams. And the amazing thing is that red squirrels obviously have co-evolved with pine martens so that they can get onto the edge of branches and escape pine martens, but they are prey for pine martens. Grey squirrels, because they're that heavier, pine martens will have a preference for grey squirrels when there is red squirrels and grey squirrels in a habitat, but when there are just red squirrels, pine martens will still go for red squirrels. That is their prey. But red squirrels can be a bit better at avoiding them than grey squirrels. That's what I know.
Yeah, I can add a little bit on there. So there's some really brilliant work that's been done by Dr. Emma Sheehy, who's part of our project, in her previous work, as well as a lot of really great work coming out of Northern Ireland and Ireland on their work with pine martens. So very much check out those researchers and conservationists and the work they're doing. But pine martens are a really important part of red squirrel conservation. So while they are the native prey, exactly as Dani mentioned, because grey squirrels don't have a evolutionary response or fear of pine martens, where red squirrels, as soon as they detect a pine marten in an area, are very quick to relocate, use other drays, move away from an area. Grey squirrels do not have this reaction. So in places where you have both red and grey squirrels, when pine martens are introduced, often it is quite a detrimental impact on the grey squirrel population. And there's some really interesting work on the looking at the diet of pine martens in places where you have red and gray squirrels, and where even where you have no gray squirrels, red squirrels are not likely to make up more than 2 to 3% of a pine marten's diet, where they can be in the range of 30 to 40% of the diet. In gray squirrels can be up to 30 to 40% of the diet. So there's some really interesting work. I mentioned Emma Sheehy. There's something called the Sheehy effect, where you have pine martens in a place with both red and gray squirrels. The introduction of pine martens will result in red squirrel numbers going up rather than down. So really important part of the conservation story and long-term maintenance of that native relationship.
Awesome. I got this shot when we were monitoring. I was helping to monitor the pine martens that were reintroduced into the Forest of Dean here in Gloucestershire, and I got this. It was a bait station, so they were coming down for peanuts, eggs, and jam. But I did get a shot of one of the radio-collared female pine martens attempt to chase a grey squirrel, but the grey squirrel only realized what was happening at the last minute and sort of just jumped off the log. But then the pine marten was like, well, if there's an egg, I'll have the egg instead. But I got this like brief interaction between a female marten and a grey squirrel. Just before we jump into some more sort of nitty gritty stuff as well, and I'm conscious Nicole's been chatting for ages now, I'm going to ask Dani a quick question because I've got one. Dani, you captured so many different behaviors in your work with the imagery in your videos. Is there a behavior that you haven't captured yet that you'd like to capture with red squirrels?
Oh, I would love to. I've seen red squirrels pick up mushrooms that they have put in a spot and it's dried, and they've then picked it up again and relocated it. I'd love to capture that moment where they pick up a mushroom that is already dried out.
Yeah.
And then put into and then cached. I've only managed to capture them take a fresh mushroom from the ground and then put it into a tree. But something I did capture earlier this year, and I've been trying to capture it for like 2 years, is a very unique sound they make, which I can't recreate it. But it's a warning sound, but it's not as it's like a very low frequency squeak almost. I put it in a video, but they only do it a few times, and it's really only when they see cats, and so they don't usually do it to me. But I did manage to capture it once, so
nice one.
Yeah.
Cool. So I'm conscious of time because we've got some closing things to do, but we'll do another 5 minutes worth of questions and then we'll start and then we'll wrap the Q&A up. Does that sound like a plan? So another question to dive straight back into: how has climate change and altered weather patterns impacted the behavior and survival of red squirrels? Good question.
I can take a stab at this one to kick us off. So it's still an evolving question. So we don't have any firm answers. Obviously, as winters get warmer, this opens the door for more successful breeding both by reds and grey squirrels. So we have anecdotal evidence from our staff in the south of Scotland who have seen an increase in grey squirrel reproduction during the kind of January to February period. This happens normally, but with warmer winters, it's likely that will become more successful over time. That will play a role in their kind of densities. It also plays a big shift on our native forests and the habitat available. So we see this in Scotland. A lot of our kind of climate resiliency perspectives and what we're hoping to do with native rainforest restoration and a lot of our kind of forest targets going into the future are based largely around broadleaf corridors. To date, a lot of the reason that we've been able to maintain low grey squirrel numbers, particularly in the highlands, is the share of conifers. And so as we shift that for both climate and other resiliency factors, we pose a greater risk for grey squirrel incursion into the landscape.
Nice one. Happy days. Just scrolling through these. So Meg just popped up and said she missed what we said about the parasite in their drays. Can we just repeat that again, if that's possible?
Yeah, so red squirrels will have 2 to 3 drays that they will use in the summer just to avoid too many parasites building up. That could be also one of the reasons that mothers will move their kits. So, you know, if you've got squirrels living in one place for many, many weeks, potentially months, you will have a buildup of fleas. So they will use multiple drays just to keep parasites down.
Thanks, Dani. And then one from Helen here. Someone recently mentioned that a golden tail could be a sign of a true British squirrel rather than a European import. Have you seen any golden tails in Sweden, Dani?
No, I haven't.
No, quick and easy. And then one here from Rowena Miller. Could a Hearts and Minds initiative to educate the public about the delights and benefits of native red squirrels help them repopulate the south of the UK?
Yeah, of course. I mean, particularly in the south, like a lot of people probably have never seen a red squirrel. So, I mean, there's a few places you can go. British Wildlife Centre, they have captive red squirrels, but obviously being able to be surrounded by them in the wild is like the best. I went to Brownsea Island last week, and I think that's an incredible place where you can observe red squirrels very close. They'll run between your legs. They're not tame. They won't run up you. They're very polite, but it's a great place that you can actually where people can be actually engaged in red squirrels. I think it's so important that we bring red squirrels somehow into the curriculum for kids, so they just become aware of them, because I'm sure if you ask a kid in London, you know, what color's a native squirrel in the UK, they might say grey.
Yep.
So a lot of people don't know that red squirrels are our native squirrel. They've just become so used to the grey squirrel. So we need to keep shouting about red squirrels as much as we can.
And we've got Red Squirrel Awareness Week to do that. And so, nice one. Thanks, Dani. There's one more question. There's a couple more that we're not going to have time to get through because we've got a few more bits to close with. But any unanswered questions will be sent to the panelists and we will send them back out at a later date. So if you have got a question that we've not got around to, I do apologize, but we're starting to run out of time, but we will get to it at a later date. So final question. How does the presence of red squirrels influence the biodiversity within their ecosystems in the UK? We think
I can take this one. Yeah, so they play a really important role, as I mentioned, with our native forest biodiversity, so the diversity of trees, particularly native species, and the mix that we get in our forests. As mentioned, they have a really unique relationship with pine martens, and that'll have a lot of knock-on effects for other wildlife in our forest ecosystems. And so as we slowly get back, we talk a lot about rewilding. That happens gradually over time and involves a lot of different moving parts. And I would say that red squirrels are a really important component of those different moving parts toward a rewild and restoration of our native forests.
Thank you very much, both. So I'm going to any list. Dani, sorry, do you want to jump in there?
I just wanted to quickly add, just to make it very clear, they have an ecological role in seed dispersal. So you know, some people say, oh, squirrels are a bit dumb because they forget some of the food that they've cached, but that's actually evolutionary beneficial because they're putting a sweet chestnut into the ground that could then become a tree. So, and they're moving seeds and nuts throughout the forest, and those then could become trees. So they're actually incredibly ecologically important.
Great, they sure are. Yeah, nice one. So thank you very much, both. We're just going to carry on for just a little. We've got a few more slides just to run through, sort of what's looking ahead with what Mammal Society have coming up. So thanks, and thank you for all your questions. We will be getting back to those as well. So you will get your answers at a later date with the ones we sadly didn't get time to go through. So coming up, what have we got coming up? So if you didn't know, National Mammal Week. So it's been Red Squirrel Awareness Week, and they're going to get another spotlight next week as well, because, you know, it's the red squirrel, so we've got to shine them again. But next week is National Mammal Week, and that's taking place from the 9th to the 15th of October. And this year, Mammal Society are going to be exploring mammal connections, looking at the vital bonds of mammals within our daily lives and our UK landscapes. And we've got many activities planned for next week, including some owl palette owl pellet, crikey, can't say that one, owl pellet dissection workshops. That's going to be a real hoot. We've got a wildlife art competition and many more free webinars that you can sign up to and join in on. And I'm just going to run you through the outline for next week's webinars now. So kicking off on Wednesday, the 11th of October, this will be our first one of the week, and we're going to be exploring the importance of our mammals, exploring their vital ecological roles, and the conservation challenges and their interconnectedness with our human life. Now, this is going to be joined by Mammal Society Chair and ecologist Dr. Stephanie Ray, naturalist and wildlife illustrator Guy Troughton, and broadcaster, author, and Mammal Society patron Zeb Soanes for this enlightening webinar on our mammal connections. And I do apologize if I have mispronounced any of their surnames there. But that's not all. We have another one on the Thursday, and we're going back to the future, uniting nature and neighborhoods with Project Nightwatch. Now, this webinar will explore how important bats are to our local landscapes, sharing insights from Bat Conservation Trust's Project Nightwatch. And this project was piloted with the aim of bringing bats to new audiences whilst increasing urban bat records. So this is another free webinar, and it will be celebrating the power of diversity and community in efforts to protect and champion the UK's wildlife. And we have one more webinar, which Dani will be joining us back for again on Friday, the 13th of October. And this is going to be about taking ethical wildlife photos. And as you can see from some of Dani's amazing pictures today about how the power that wildlife photography has in inspiring others to protect wildlife and our environments within that, but unethical practices can sometimes cause harm to our wildlife. So in this final webinar, we'll be joined again by Dani, and another speaker will be wildlife photographer and author Susan Young as we explore best practices. But if you can't make any of them, there's lots of other things that you can get involved with Mammal Society moving forward. So if anyone isn't aware of Mammal Mapper, you can download that. And if you see any mammals, you can report your sightings, whether they're marine or terrestrial, and then all the records will join the nationwide database of citizen science records at the NBN and the BRC, where they will be verified by expert county recorders. Lovely. So we just sort of want to finish by wrapping up with thank you very much for everyone for joining. And once again, thank you so much to Dani and Nicole for your presentations and taking time out of your day to join us today. And for the rest of you, please do keep an eye out for events like this in the future. And we hope you have a lovely afternoon. And there's a nice pine martin there to finish on as well. So I can just keep an eye on what we're up to. So thank you very much for tuning in. And we will see you for National Mammal Week. So thank you very much.
Thank you.